So we recently got the massive reveal of everything coming with Season 11, which includes a bunch of overhauls to existing systems like tempering and masterworking, some pretty big changes to stats, more specifically things like defenses, and then all of the new content coming with Season 11 specifically. Now I didn't just want to do an overview video because there's way too much stuff and way too much specifics on how all of this stuff is actually going to work together. So instead, I'm just going to be doing videos going much more in depth with specific aspects coming with Season 11. And I think the best place to start is to go over what is specific to this Season 11 theme and new content coming with that, because this also includes one of the most exciting things I think we've gotten in Diablo 4 so far. And also make sure to subscribe because I am going to be doing a bunch of additional videos going over all of those specific aspects coming with Season 11, a lot of which are overhauls permanent to the game going forward, and a lot of this is going to have pretty big impacts on how the game just plays in general. And even though we're getting quite a lot of new overhauls that are going to be permanent to the game, we're also getting quite a lot of Season 11 content or changes, one of which being Sanctification, which is our first season-specific crafting system. And this is seeming to be absolutely crazy in terms of what you could possibly be putting on your gear. So Sanctification is essentially going to be taking a fraction of a power of the high heavens to enchant our gear, and this is essentially going to be the end of the road of the crafting of a piece of gear. Because once you sanctify a piece of gear, you can now do nothing else to that piece of gear. You can't enchant it anymore, you can't temper it, you can't masterwork it, so you have to do everything you want to do to a piece of gear before you sanctify it, and then that gear is essentially locked with that new power you got from sanctifying it. And there's a handful of different things that can happen to this gear, none of which brick the gear. I've been seeing that a lot of people thinking somehow bricks a piece of gear. Everything that's going to be happening to that gear is increasing the power of it in some way. Nothing is making that gear worse, or pretty much nothing. There's actually one thing in this that possibly could make a piece of gear worse, but this would be in really rare circumstances, and it's not really supposed to do that. But outside of that small chance, everything else is making your gear stronger. And while there are some options here that don't really do anything for you in combat, nothing in this is actually bricking your gear, and pretty much nothing in this is making your gear weaker. So keep all that in mind. You're just getting less strong buffs essentially. Now, to get all these different buffs that we'll go over, there's two different ways of allowing you to sanctify your gear. In pre-torment difficulties, so while we're leveling, after you defeat a lesser evil, there's going to be a bunch of lesser evils in this season, you'll have a rare chance to be able to go to the Heavenly Anvil to sanctify an item. And if you choose not to do this, you'll be able to go back whenever you want until you earn another divine invitation to go to this Heavenly Anvil, which seems to overwrite the previous one so you can't stack them up. So that's how you obtain these sanctifications pretty much before the end game, before your max level, or more specifically before you get into torment tiers. But once you get to the end game, you can also earn heavenly sigils, which are what you need to sanctify ancestral items, and these can only be obtained in torment difficulties, which probably won't care about sanctifying non-ancestral items once you're in torment tiers. So once you get into torment tiers and get your ancestral items, you will only care about heavenly sigils, and these heavenly sigils can be stacked up and they take you to the heavenly forge so you can sanctify an item. But that's the two ways you can actually sanctify items that get taken to the Heavenly Forge to do that. But what actually happens when you sanctify an item? You have one of 5 different options when you sanctify an item. You will either apply a bonus legendary power, which, yes, you heard that right. You can get a second legendary power on an item, and this can be done on anything. So you can also get a legendary aspect roll on a, say, unique item or a mythic item. So you can have like a mythic item with its mythic power, all of its normal rolls, and you can add a random legendary power to it. We don't know right now if any of this has guidelines. Like, let's say you're on a barbarian and you're sanctifying a mythic item. We don't know if this has like a higher chance to be a barbarian specific legendary power. We don't know if it could say only be generic legendary powers. We don't actually know that yet. And that includes all these other rolls you could possibly get. So we don't know if it's fully random or if it has some guidelines at stake. sticks to. But the second possibility is to improve an affix into a greater affix. We also don't know if there's guidelines with this. We don't know if you could possibly get a greater affix roll on a tempering roll. Seemingly are still considered affixes. So you could potentially have a tempering and turn that into a greater affix if that's how this works. So that's another really strong possible effect. Then you have add a bonus affix from a pool of special sanctified affixes. Now these are unique sanctified affixes that we can't normally get. We've gotten the example of one of them that was an increase to lightning damage, but it was multiplicative instead of additive like normal affixes. So it seems these sanctified affixes are absolutely cracked and going to be stronger than any other affix possible. Then you have a chance to replace an existing affix with a random sanctification affix. So instead of just adding one, it replaces it. So this is weaker than the add of a pool of the special sanctified affixes. This is just replace an existing affix with one of those. And this is the only possible way I could see sanctifying making an item weaker, because while the only sanctified affix we've seen is multiplicative, there still is the chance that you could replace like a rank bonus to a passive from your skill tree, which are already multiplicative. So there could be the possibility that you could re-roll like one of those passives. Could potentially be a downgrade depending on how strong these sanctification affixes are. There's also the possibility that this could replace a tempering. If that's a possibility, again, we don't know the guidelines of this. So if it can replace a tempering affix, there could be the possibility that it's weaker, like having the chance for when your skills to deal double damage. If that got replaced with a sanctification affix, that could potentially be weaker. With the example of the special affixes we've seen so far, they're multiplicative increases, which are stronger than almost every other affix. So if it's a possibility that this makes an item weaker, it will be very rare and probably won't happen a majority of the time. Then the last one, which seems to be the one you just don't want to get, is make your item indestructible, meaning it can't lose durability. So if you die, you never have to repair it. And that seems to be the roll that just doesn't change your item at all, really. So none of this really makes your items weaker, and at the high end makes your items absolutely ridiculous. So if you've been seeing people say you can just brick items through this, you really can't. This just makes your items stronger. Even if it doesn't make it near as good as another one of these sanctified rolls could, you're still not bricking items. Even if you replaced an affix with a weaker one and the sanctified affix was just weaker than the one it replaced, even at that point, that's still not bricking an item. There's almost no affix on your gear that is required to make a build specifically work. So you can't actually brick items through this. In pretty much all the circumstances, it will just be an upgrade in some way. So keep all that in mind. You're not bricking items through this, but the high end of this roll is going to be crazy. And then we have the main new content coming with Season 11. A majority of this is seeming to be Season 11 specific, but one of the parts is actually permanent to the game. So in Season 11, a lot of the endgame content throughout the game, so a lot of the systems are going to be invaded by lesser evils. So for instance, Duriel is going to be taking over Helltides, meaning Helltides are just going to be like infused with Duriel's essence. You're going to be facing a bunch of different enemies. Duriel is going to be taking over for the Blood Maiden as the boss you summon, and there's just going to be a bunch of different things themed around Duriel specifically for Helltides. And a bunch of different pieces of endgame content are going to be taken over by other lesser evils, including the introduction of Asmodan to Diablo 4. So Asmodan is going to be a new world boss for Season 11, but specifically just for being a cyclable world boss, which is mixed in with all the other world bosses. Asmodan is going to be permanent to the game. So now we will have Asmodan as one of the potential world bosses we go against. But as a Season 11 specific thing, Asmodan is also going to be another version of a world boss where you will essentially go to this open world area and there will be these different summoning altars, which is where you can constantly face Asmodan for Season 11. So essentially, once you get to this area, there will be these 3 summoning altars. Each one will still summon Asmodan, but depending on which altar you choose, will change up the things you're fighting in this. But essentially, when you choose one of these altars, you summon waves of enemies that you defeat, then Asmodan will summon and you defeat Asmodean. And each one of these pillars does something different for that fight. And each one of those pillars is essentially infusing this fight with the power of a different lesser evil. So while you're still facing Asmodean at the end, the waves of enemies that summon before you face Asmodean will be different depending on the altar you choose, and the Asmodean fight itself will also be altered depending on which altar you choose. So you will have different abilities influenced by those other lesser evils. Then once you defeat Asmodean, he will summon a handful of different chests you can choose between to open with corrupted essence, and these are essentially the endgame bosses of the boss ladder you get to choose between. So after you defeat Asmodean, you essentially get to choose between the loot of one of the boss ladder bosses, but you're instead just using this corrupted essence instead of going to the boss itself and using that boss's specific materials. So this is essentially another way to target farm uniques with a different currency. And also seems to be cool because you're getting all these waves of enemies infused with the different lesser evils minions, and then Asmodean will have different powers depending on which one you choose. So this seems to be a pretty interesting way to target farm different uniques with a new boss fight and new kind of wave modes. And then we have all of the different pieces of endgame content being overtaken by lesser evils. Like I mentioned, Duriel is taking over Helltides, so instead of summoning Blood Maiden, we now summon Duriel. And upon reaching maximum threat, Pangs of Duriel will spawn instead of Hellborn, and you'll be able to find these Pangs all over Helltides, and slaying any of these Pangs will give you Baneful Hurts to then summon Duriel. And monster packs in Helltides will now feature the monster family of maggots, including the new Potent of Pain Mega Maggots, and the Hellworm spawn, so the big Hellworms that pop out and spew out a bunch of enemies will now spew out maggots, and the meteors that normally drop on you all the time in Helltides will now drop maggots on you. So there are a bunch of additional enemies. We'll be facing Duriel, and Helltides will just essentially be taken over by Duriel and his minions. Then we go to the pit, which is being taken over by Belial. So while you're running any of the pit runs, Belial's eyes will randomly appear. Once destroyed, they'll stun nearby enemies and summon a pack of Belial apparitions. Slaying those apparitions will count towards your pit progress. So they're adding in some different elements that allow you to potentially progress pit runs even more quickly. Then destroying several eyes during your run will replace the final boss with Belial himself. Killing him grants an additional glyph upgrade and rewards. So now in these pit runs, these eyes that can stun nearby enemies and summon apparitions that will help you progress your pit faster. If you defeat a certain amount of those, you will now change the boss into Belial, which will give you more glyph progress and more rewards, making pit runs just much more valuable and much more rewarding. And then also, as you're running throughout the pit, Belial can pop up and essentially clone the enemies you're facing to try to confuse you, but I'm not sure if these will actually be like enemy clones that progress your pit even faster or not, or if they're just supposed to be there as more obstacles. And then for the final piece of content overtaken by lesser evils, we have Endariel taking over the Karas Undercity. So Endariel has corrupted the spirit beacons, which are all the beacons in the Undercity that are the main way you progress. You click them, you defeat all the enemies that are summoned, and they give you that big buff, and they'll be much more dangerous because they're corrupted, but they'll grant a lot more attunement, meaning you could potentially run the Undercity much more quickly. They're also adding 3 new Undercity tributes specific to Endariel. Each boosts your Undercity rewards and will guarantee Endariel spawns as the final boss, but these tributes will also add dungeon affixes to those runs, so you're basically juicing up that Undercity run to give you a lot more rewards and making Endariel the end boss. Shades of Endariel can also be in the Undercity now, and they will attack you and sap your time, so just another essentially trap throughout your runs. Endariel can also appear as the Undercity boss, presumably from any tribute, not just the new tributes that guarantee her as the end boss, and when she appears as the end boss, you will get more rewards. Let's say you're doing a rune run, you get Endariel as the boss, it'll just juice up your rune run. And then some of the enemies in the Undercity will now just be spirits, which will launch different attacks that track you. And then also defeating any of the Season 11 specific lesser evil enemies or bosses will give you Divine Favor, which will level up the Divine Gifts, which is essentially the powers for Season 11, and will also progress your reputation board. So the power system for Season 11 are these Divine Gifts, but they actually are a lot more interesting and actually buff up the rewards you can get from content. So in this system, and you'll see it in the screenshot, there's essentially 2 different types of slots you can put these powers in. there's purified and corrupted. And you'll see in the center, there's 4 purified sockets. On the outer rings, there's 4 corrupted sockets. And depending where you put these, you will get different effects. But every single one of these powers, no matter where you put it, has some type of reward interaction with it, which will give you more drops depending on the content you're doing. So let's say for the Essence of Pain, the rewards, which no matter where you put this, you will get the rewards. Pangs of Duriel can drop socketables in Helltides. Now, most of the reward parts of these divine gifts are also doubled while purified, which you only have 4 purified slots, but you'll still be getting rewards in the corrupted slots. Now, if they're purified, they will also give you some type of combat buff. So this Essence of Pain one, you will briefly gain max barrier after becoming injured every 20 seconds. You will also be able to upgrade all of these like normal powers, but if they're purified, you'll be getting some type of increase to your power or some beneficial effect. You'll be able to have 4 of those, as I mentioned, but you can also increase the difficulty of specific content by putting these powers in the corrupted slots. Now, like I mentioned, the corrupted slots will also give you the reward buff as well. If you put the Essence of Pain in a corrupted slot, you would still get the effect how Pangs of Duriel can drop socketables in Helltides. It wouldn't be doubled because it's not in a purified slot, you'd still get that buff, but you would also activate the corrupted effect of this, which Pangs of Duriel ambush you more often and have a 100% chance to shatter your barriers or fortify lives with their attacks. So now you're still getting the reward benefit of this, you're not getting the purified benefit, but you're getting the corrupted side effect that makes that content more difficult. And like I mentioned, you can upgrade all of these gifts. So that Essence of Pain we just went over, the upgrades to it give higher quality runes and gem drops. And again, the reward part of this is that the Pangs of Duriel and Helltides can drop socketables. So as you upgrade it, you'll get higher quality runes and gem drops through that. And there are 8 total of these gifts. So if you want to also use all 4 of the corrupted slots, you will be using all 8 gifts that all give you different buffs. So for instance, another one is Maggots in Helltides can drop experience globes. These are doubled when purified, and as you upgrade this, more experience globes drop. And then there are upgrades for pits and a bunch of different other things. And then there are also upgrades to all of the other content that lesser evils are in. So these aren't really going to be reward buffs for anything that the lesser evils aren't in. So for a lot of the season, you're going to want to be sticking with pits, the Undercity, and Helltides. Those are going to be the main things that are really buffed through the Season 11 specific pieces of content and through the Season 11 powers. So that's pretty much all of the Season 11 specific content. We're still going to be getting a quest line to do all this like normal. We're still going to be getting the reputation board that's almost certainly going to have a resplendent spark at the end that you'll be able to just keep getting reputation to get the infinite caches like normal. So you'll have some of the similar things to previous seasons, but the season specific content outside of that is going to just be really interesting. We're getting the new Sanctification crafting for the season. We're getting all these different pieces of content, getting kind of overhauled to be invaded by these lesser evils. Then we're getting these different powers that can make content harder, but give you a bunch of additional rewards. So the season specific content for Season 11 is actually seeming to be really interesting and adding a lot more interesting ways to make content more difficult while getting more rewards, which I think is something they really need to do more of in future seasons. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.